Many broadcasting channels are now available in Hong Kong. If you find a program or an advertisement is in breach of the codes of practice, you may write to the Broadcasting Authority. State the time, date, the channel, the substance of complaint, together with your name, contact number, and send it by mail, fax, or email. The detailed information you give will facilitate investigation. Complaint forms are also available at the Broadcasting Authority homepage.
The Hong Kong Management Association congratulates Bank of China Group Life Assurance Company Limited on winning the 2010 HKMA Quality Award Silver Award.
營養快線，幸福牽線，純正果汁，香濃酸奶，多重營養，益生菌發酵，營養一步到位，幸福有滋有味，哇哈哈！營養快線，記得早餐飲一支啊！
Thanks for staying with us. This is Newsline, and we're talking about minimum wage in Hong Kong. We were talking before the break about an anti-rich sentiment in Hong Kong, an anti-business sentiment. You represent business in Hong Kong. Brian Rennick, Employees Federation of Hong Kong, Vice Chairman. Why is there now suddenly this anti-rich sentiment? I asked you before the break whether you're worried. You said you were. But surely this sentiment has grown because of an unfairness in society. And the fact that you're saying that businesses don't want to pay a livable wage.
Well, I think that let's separate the two things. The minimum wage is one subject, and we can go on talking about that. But if you're talking about anti-business sentiment, I think that goes way, way, way beyond the minimum wage debate. It goes back to the causes of the financial crisis. It goes back to widely reported in the media excessive bonuses and people saying, hey, you know, how on earth does this guy deserve to earn this sort of bonus? There's a whole range of things like that. And as people become more sophisticated, better educated, and not blaming the media particularly, but the media tends to enjoy things that cause a sensation. And so it comes around, and everybody would like to be a little bit wealthier, for goodness sake. And if there's a way of becoming, if you see other people getting wealthier and you're not, it's almost inevitable.
And you get angry. Well, you know, Lei Chuk-yen, you're a trade unionist and a legislative councillor. Do you buy Mr. Rennick's argument that it's been a build-up, or do you find that this anti-rich sentiment is because people are saying they don't want to take this anymore?
Yeah, of course, it's an accumulative effect. But now, recently, there's several issues that really triggered it off. You know, one is the minimum wage debate. You know, people are feeling that, you know, business sector are so mean. You know, talking about $20,
He's separating
$24. You know, you cannot separate the two. Actually, you know, the whole debate about minimum wage is about, you know, whether workers can live on it, and then the employer saying, oh, I don't care about whether you can live on it, but we care about our expenditure. Our expenses.
Are you worried about this sentiment?
Yeah, I'm worried about the sentiment, you know, because it's not good for the society. You know, we don't want an anti-rich sentiment, but what we want is a fair system.
If this sentiment doesn't go away, where is it going to take us?
You know, it would really break up the society. Yeah. There will be more tension in the society.
Are you talking about civil disorder?
One of them, you know. But one thing I want to point out is not just the economic injustice that caused this anti-rich sentiment. It's also the political injustice. You know, when another debate that had always gone on is about a functional constituency. You know, the rich, you know, business sector monopolizing.
These are the 30 seats in LegCo that are so-called small circle elections.
Yeah, and most of them are occupied business sector. So for then the people will say, okay, you guys get rich. Because the system is unfair and you get more political power to protect your privileges. So it's the unfairness of the system that really anger the people. So what we are saying that how to solve it is to really get the system, the whole society more democratized, and then there should be more intervention.
That's a much larger. That's a much
balance the interests of all the groups.
It's a much larger issue.
That's the only solution.
Surely, one of the things we have to do is to separate the anti-rich feeling from the anti-business thing. Now, anti-rich is one thing; it's usually individuals who are rich. Anti-business is actually much more serious. We all know that 90-something% of businesses in Hong Kong are small businesses employing a very small number of people. It would be absurd, I think, for people to be anti that sort of business. They're the lifeblood, the heart of Hong Kong. We're a small business. You know, umpteen small businessmen. They're the people that keep Hong Kong going. So this sort of sentiment is narrowed to a relatively few, perhaps, individuals and maybe a relatively few companies. Now, the flaw in that argument is that most of those big companies employ hundreds of thousands of people in Hong Kong. People depend upon them for their livelihoods. And honestly, most of them pay extremely reasonable salaries. They have to in order to get people. So what we're talking about in terms of mean employers' living wage is a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of employers who are probably exploiting the system and probably exploiting their workers. I'm sure there are some like that. Just as I know perfectly well...
There are some big companies who do that too. There have been stories about 7-Eleven, Cafe de Coral, McDonald's paying slave wages.
If they were paying slave wages, they wouldn't have employees. There is still a huge demand for employees in this time. So if you pay less than you ought to, whatever ought to is.
But they are bullying
Isn't there a moral argument here? If you talk about market forces, but when you pay somebody $10, $12, $15 an hour, that is mean.
You and I may think it is mean, but the reality is that if it is not acceptable, people won't take the jobs.
They don't have a choice.
Now, that's exactly why there's an anti-business sentiment, you know, because people, you know, that's sort of saying, you know, people are really forced out of their necessity, you know, to feed themselves, to really work on this. You know, there are cases where, you know, toilets cleaner $7 per hour in the past, you know, and that's an outrage
they
against that.
They take the job, I guess, is because they have no choice.
No choice. But I want to come back to your point about, you know, it's a small minority that really monopolize the system in a way. But exactly that's the problem. You know, the small and business, I would agree that the SME are also, you know, victims of the system. You know, they are also bullied by this big business tycoon. But exactly that's the problem. You know, when I don't think the anti-rich is just from the workers. It's also from small and medium enterprise because they feel they are squeezed out by this big one. But then these big ones are the one that are very clearly identified as the one that control the economy and control the politics. You know, when people look at Wu Jintao, you know, shaking hands, meeting with Li Ka-shing, and not really meeting with the chief executive, but meeting with Li Ka-shing, people think, oh, what is happening? And exactly this is the sort of thing, a small minority and the rich and powerful controlling the politics and controlling the economy that people really feel very much disappointed.
I doubt very much if you spoke to any of these so-called rich and powerful people, they would have any sense of the fact that they're controlling the economy or controlling things. To my certain knowledge, talking to the senior executives in our federation, for example, they have just as many problems as everybody else does dealing with governments and officials because the government's trying to balance the forces. So I think the sensation that we have is that we have our problems, we have a case to make, we have various things that we need to do, and we also feel squeezed out at times. I mean, no disrespect to you, but we feel that the Labour voice is the loudest voice in the community. You've only got to get out into the street with a placard and you get government's attention.
You can do the same thing. In your jacket and your tie.
But you don't need it. You know, you have people in the executive council to, you know, speak for you guys. So you have people in the LegCo, you know, to speak for you guys without needing to go with a placard in a way.
And so do you. And that's the point about society. Our society, as I was saying to somebody else the other day, our society has to, obviously, like all societies do, to strike the balances. And I do think that there is a sort of lunatic fringe on both ends of the scale. There's a lunatic fringe at the sort of rich end and there's a lunatic fringe at the poor end. Somewhere,
You've got people on the rich end saying we should only pay $20 an hour, like your fellow legislative councillor Tommy Cheung, and you've got the chairman of Cafe de Coral that makes millions and zillions of dollars a year, saying that if it goes up to 24 or whatever dollars an hour it is, he's going to declare a profit warning. I think isn't that fanning this anti-business sentiment?
As I say, there are all sorts of things that are being said and all sorts of things that are being done. The vast majority of the people in the community, the vast majority of the employers in the community want to make this thing work as well as it possibly can. Whether or not you like the idea of minimum wages, and there's good social and economic reasons why it's not a good idea, but there are good social reasons why it is, we've got it. So what we have to do now, surely, is to work together to make it work.
Make it work together. Okay, now the talk is that it's going to be about $28, $29. It's in that range. I'm going to ask you this, Mr. Lee Cheuk Yan. There is some fear that once it's set at $28 or $28.50 or $29, whatever it is, okay? If it's set at that, that becomes the accepted wage. And even people who are earning above that, their bosses are going to lower it down to $28. It's become like it's the flagpole in a taxi fare. That's the accepted wage that the government has set. Aren't you worried about that?
No, I'm not worried about the minimum wage floor becoming the so-called the maximum wage, because you know it's not the market force. You know, if the market force is pushes the wage above the minimum wage, you cannot get it down. But what it did actually is when the market force pushes down, you have a floor. So that it won't go down. So it will not, get wages above the minimum wage to go down. That's not the.
So you're not worried about that. But will bosses do that? Will they say, well, the minimum wage is $28. Why am I going to pay this guy $29 or $30 an hour? I'll pay him $28.
I'm sure there will be a minority of people who will say just that. But the vast majority, and I've talked to a lot of them, the vast majority, in fact, realize that by setting the floor here, wherever you set it, in fact, there's going to be a bump upwards from the people that are closest to that. There will be, for example, in a big corporation, if somebody's earning $30 an hour and has been used to it and somebody else is earning 25, if that 25 comes up to 30, that person earning 30, sure as anything, is going to want an increase because this person has caught him up. So there will be a ripple up effect from the floor. That may or may not be a good or a bad thing. That's not the point. The point is it will happen. So no, I'm not worried about it.
How many people will benefit if it's $28 an hour?
If $28 is 310,000 people will get a wage.
So there are 310,000 people now earning less than $5,800 a month.
Yeah. So
is that fair?
How can you say what's fair and what's not fair?
Is that fair?
I think quite a lot of those. I think some of those people, and again, I must be careful how I say this, because the real effects of this won't be showing up for another year or two at the very least. But I think some of those people will lose their jobs. Now, how many, to what extent, how serious it is? Some of those 300 and something odd thousand people will lose their jobs.
If people lose their jobs, do you think it's because of the meanness of the bosses, or what? If they lose their jobs, who's going to do the job that they've been doing?
I don't want to put all the blame on the bosses in a way, because they are also suffering from high rent, as I've said. Now they are losing job already. But what I'm trying to appeal to the business sector is don't blame it on the minimum wage. When one businessman, I think Brian will agree, there's so many factors affecting his business decision. And then what I'm worried about is that when the minimum come into force, they will blame everything on the minimum wage, which actually is not true. They will do it anyway. If they want to lay off people, they will do it anyway, even without minimum wage, because of a different business cost factor.
For 30 seconds, if there was a $28 set minimum wage, you're going to have to accept that.
Yes.
Is the business community going to fight a battle against high rents with the same vigor you fought this battle against minimum wage?
Every businessman fights his own battle against high rates. I can assure you the negotiations that go on between landlord and tenant, whether you're a big business or a small business,
I mean a united, concerted effort in the same way that you've done with minimum wage.
You can't do that for the same reason.
Why not?
Well, it's a market force. If 10 people want a piece of property, there's not much you can do about saying we're going to cut back the landlord's rent on this particular piece of property, because somebody else is going to pay more. It's the way it is in the market. Now, you may say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but in a free economy, that's what happens.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to end it right there. See you next week. Good evening.